Hello, I'm Nan Simonson, and I am thinking that um, I'm about to do what I did when I published Aging Powerfully, and that is kind of let a lot of things hang out. I remember when it was already being published and sent out to the publisher, and I thought, oh man, I hope I didn't go too far. I let secrets out that nobody had known about my entire life. Um, well, except for my late husband. And oh, look at this! Look at this! Isn't I'm gonna show you? Isn't this fun? It's kind of like a little hippie shirt. In that, it's just a scarf made into a blouse with a little under thing under it. Anyway, I don't know what that was about, but so when I wrote Aging Powerfully, part memoir, most of it from lessons learned, directives to getting the most out of life as we live and as we age with power. I thought, man, I put it all out there. There's no secrets now. Well, today's talk is going to be a little bit of that. And the title is Getting It On, Getting It Up, and getting very personal. Um, Last week, I posted a video, how to hold on to your mate. And you would think it would be some psychological thing or some lessons on relationships, and it turned out to be, and I acknowledge this, I said, boy, you're probably thinking, oh, Nan, and it turned out to be basically my way of saying, um, keep them healthy, keep them alive, keep them strong, keep them vibrant in good health, because that's how we keep our mates. I, as I mentioned, lost my husband of 40 years to an illness, esophageal cancer. And there are too many illnesses now. I don't know what we would have done to prevent that, because he didn't do what you do to get esophageal cancer, and it metastasized after treatment, and we knew it, and that was our life for 7 months while he was on home hospice. And I think my strongest emotion as it relates to health is that all you have to do is look around. All you have to do is think of your friends and your family and understand how many of them have critical chronic illnesses that are, quite frankly, many, at least 80% of the chronic illnesses that we've come to see in this country, cardiovascular disease, pulmonary disease, diabetes, obesity, and the effects that obesity has on our body, many cancers, are lifestyle related. That's one of the reasons I went into lifestyle medicine as a health and lifestyle coach for Lifestyle Medical, a medical office here in Riverside, California, to help people who are willing to do what they can based on what we call the pillars of health of lifestyle medicine to reverse their chronic diseases. And through the pillars of lifestyle medicine, we reverse, we stop, we prevent, then stop if they have occurred, and in many cases reverse many of the chronic illnesses that every doctor, including ones that were recommending to me what I call the black hole, that is medications, pills, and procedures, when I had numbers that went wonky. So I thought about you last week. As it related to some other activities, and that was what I call our play day. And I'll talk to you about that. Let me make sure I've covered what I wanted to. Okay. Last Sunday, we have a play day every Sunday. And last Sunday I thought about you because we do certain things on a regular basis. For example, every morning, my husband and I exercise. He goes much earlier than I do, but both of us spend an hour either cycling or, in my case, running. I'm getting ready for a half marathon in October. In his case, walking with his daughter very early up a mountain at a very brisk pace. 3 times a week instead of that, we'll be cycling, not necessarily together, but every Sunday we have kind of a togetherness day. And we go cycling for an hour and a half, come back, each of us wash our car, then we get changed and go off to our favorite vegan restaurant. We have been now going on 4 years, whole food plant based. And that was part of the point I made in last week's Facebook Live about how to hold on to your mate, because his lab work came in so beautifully that an endocrinologist that was reviewing them said, I have never seen triglycerides that low. You must be taking statins. And she remarked on his cholesterol, 123, and his uh, the the uh, the LDL. There's high density and low density lipids, which, and the LDLs are the low, are the dangerous ones. And she remarked on his health and his lab work, and it is the result of going on 4 years of lifestyle choices in terms of exercise, in terms of prioritizing sleep, in terms of our being connected to other people that we love and feeling loved by others. Believe it or not, that is part of the requirements of health. We are a tribal people. We love to be with others. And then finally, let's see, and then finally, diet, nutrition, what we eat. And the College of Lifestyle Medicine recommends, based on research, the most nutritionally dense eating way of eating there is, best for humans, best for the planet, and best for animals. And that is a whole food plant-based diet, or as close as we can get to that, or simply including more of the healthiest foods on the planet, which are plant-based foods, because they don't have cholesterol, they're antioxidant, and they're loaded with elements that a lot of companies make drugs out of: polyphenols, phytonutrients, phytochemicals. In any case, I was so proud and so pleased that our efforts have paid off in this man who is almost 70. In less than 2 months, he'll be 70. I'm 71. How it's paid off for both of us in our health. We indeed are determined to live and age with power. So what did that have to do with you, and what did that have to do with last Sunday? Well, because Tim and I have a party every Sunday. We have already walked, we've washed our cars, everything's shiny. We really enjoy the process of doing that. We go to and that's what I was saying earlier, we go to a whole food, um, uh, vegan and vegetarian restaurant, and it's actually basically just a window that we order from at a Whole Food store, and then you can go in and eat or eat outside. And it's absolutely the best food we've found anywhere, because a lot of vegan foods, a lot of vegetarian foods are like fast foods anywhere. Too much oil, too much sugar, too much salt. They're not necessarily good for us. It's like Beyond Burgers. They're 80% fat, and some of that is saturated and then loaded with salt. Well, this place doesn't do that. It's called Oasis, and it's fabulous. So now we've treated ourselves. Then we stop at a farm store that in Southern California is open year-round. They're on 15 acres, and they bring in the fresh produce every morning, and you buy based on what they have on their tables, and it's a huge tent, because they grow a lot, and we go home with bags of all this healthy stuff, because that's all we eat is plant-based foods. Well, beans, grains, legumes, seeds, and nuts, and fruit. and lots of greens and lots of vegetables. And then we have a party. We do it every week. And well, okay, we could do our party with this. Chef AJ loves Spindrift in a big tall glass with ice, and this one happens to be mango orange. It's so good. I'm not crazy about drinking from aluminum, so I don't do a lot of that. But this is something I'll do that with, and then this poured over a big glass of ice. And Chef AJ is someone you may want to become friends with as you and I mean become friends with in terms of familiarity, as you, if you want to add more plants and more healthy foods to your diet, because she's been a vegan for 45 years, even though she was a junk food vegan until 10 years ago. She lost 60, 70 pounds, and she is a culinary trainer par excellence. She is known very well in the whole food plant-based world, and she does a lot of culinary training on her on Chef AJ Live. In any case, so she likes this. She doesn't drink at all, and she pours a little bit of balsamic vinegar in it, 1 to 2 tablespoons mixed in, and quite frankly, it is absolutely delicious. Well, I've done that some, or I'll have a wonderful kombucha, but Tim loves to make a killer margarita. So once a week, I will have a killer margarita, and we have these wonderful raw nuts that we have a mixture of, and we sit and talk and all, and then we finish our party. Put up the do not disturb sign, and as I say, finish our party. Um, we look forward to this every week. When we go on holiday, we're going to be in Canada for a couple of weeks coming up, and we find a day that nothing else happens but that kind of, I'm going to call that self-care. Uh, it's a great way for people to bond, and it's a great way to maintain a closeness in a relationship, because without that, a lot of times we sort of settle into simply being too busy to spend a lot of time together. Um, so that's why I thought about you. I thought about how important it is in the reality of aging with power, living with power. You could be in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, like we are, 80s or 90s or beyond, and still make this an important part of who you are. Um, a satisfying sex life, with or without a partner, quite frankly, is something to continue to aim for. So that's what we're going to talk about today. As I said, highly personal, and we'll be covering some real details here. Uh, let's talk about Tim's lab work. We're going to take you back to that. What was so exciting about it? The lipid panel. Why did the lipid panel matter? Because the lipids mean the fats, and the fats represent a lot that have to do with our arterial system. The flexibility of our arteries, the strength of our veins, and then our capillaries, and then the little tubules, uh, will feed our body in ways that we are well aware of. For example, our heart, and the blood flow to our veins when we've exercised, and we need to either nourish those muscles so that they still have the strength, or rest and digest a meal to, as we say, get blood down to the digestive system. Well, you know what else needs blood? And that is the genitals. A canary in the coal mine situation for men, and a number of them don't realize this, is that they may feel that they are healthy and strong and vibrant, and life's going great, but if that isn't working well, in other words, if they can't raise the flag, in other words, if they can't get it up, in other words, if they have erectile dysfunction, that is the canary in the coal mine that says, you know what, all is not well, because that's one of the first signs. Now, there could be other reasons. There could be things that are neurological in other ways, but that is one of the first things that most doctors would or should think about. And then there should be a checkup on the vascular system, even though, as I said, we can work on the vascular system easily through lifestyle and reverse anything that's going on. But I'll mention a little bit more about that later. Um, and as I wrote here, um, let me see what I said. Now we're getting really personal when I say that my husband, Tim, who will be 70 in just a couple of weeks, several weeks, has no problem in that area. He can rise at high and mighty at the drop of a hat at almost 70 years old. Why? Because his vascular system is stellar, because his body is strong, because he exercises and that blood rushes through, and that lymphatic system that's run through contracting of muscles is healthy, because his body is fed with antioxidant, anti-inflammatory foods. So there's not some general systemic disturbance going on while the body tries to remain healthy with an onslaught of what I'll call the SAD diet, standard American diet, which is loaded with salt, which is loaded with preservatives, which is loaded with saturated fat and sugar and things that microbiome, I spoke about that last week, the gut bugs, that 3 to 5 pounds of microbes that have everything to do with our neurotransmitters, how we feel about things, that have everything to do with our immune system because of the short chain fatty acids those bugs release after they've eaten this healthy plant-based food, the stuff that doesn't hurt them, like the additives and the excess salt and the saturated fats and the hormones coming in from what they give most meats now, most animals now, and especially cows. Why? Because those cows are giving milk and having babies. That's not normal. That's all drugs, and those drugs come into us, and the amount of estrogen that comes in, it disrupts all of this stuff. So I'll simply say that when we are looking at a population that's plagued by chronic illnesses, those illnesses could be abated, and we could get back to people feeling normal, healthy, alive, energetic, and in some cases back to their sexual selves. Um, Sex should be a part of our life unless we've simply decided that we're done with it, and sometimes that happens. For example, in my case, 40-year marriage, my husband became ill, and he was ill, very ill, for a year. They treated him with chemo and radiation, lots and lots of morphine, lots of other drugs, because the pain was terrible. And he passed away 1 year after he was diagnosed. And he he physically was not able. I thought I didn't care anymore. He passed away. I thought, doesn't matter. I'm now almost 60, and I'm da 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 da. I'm done. And even though he said, "Oh, you should marry again," and all of that, I said, "No, I'm done. I'm fine. I'll just be on my own, and that will be the way things are." And so that happens. And sometimes people feel that they don't care about that part of their life. But I'll tell you something, because about a year and a half, and I said this in the last one after he passed, I started thinking, man, I loved having a partner, and I met Tim, my current husband, and we were married a couple years after, and I'm so glad that that part of our life is such an important part of it, but we make it an important part of it because we pay attention to it. So now we're going to get really into some nitty gritty, because let's talk physiology. And I'm going to read you from notes that I have so that I don't miss things. Um, we're going to talk physiology, we're going to talk anatomy. Be ready for it, okay? Arousal happens in both men and women. Sometimes we think, well, it's just the guy, and the women go along with it. A lot of women know that's not the case. They have desires just as strong as men do. But for a number of reasons, sometimes women kind of turn off that part of their brain, or think it doesn't matter, and sometimes men do. Sometimes men give up because they can't do it anymore, and they just tell themselves that's not them anymore and it doesn't matter. But quite frankly, men identify with that part of their life. They identify with their erections because they have, from the time they reached puberty. It's a big part, a big part of who they are and who they were. And so although it may be convenient to think it doesn't matter, when you have it, you realize that it's a really nice part of life. So for men, the sexual pleasure pretty well centers around the penis. For women, it centers around something called the clitoris. Some people call it the clit. That almost sounds like a dismissal of it. But so what is that, and where is that? In case you're not sure, let's talk anatomy. First of all, a man's anatomy. If you, instead of looking at it head on, if you look at it sideways, and we're looking at the side of the body, starting at the top, you've got the penis, you've got the scrotum, you have the anus. The penis is where the sexual organs, meaning semen, come out, as well as the urethra for urine. The scrotum holds the semen, and behind that, the anus, thank goodness, gets rid of that stuff that we eat. The really good stuff, if you are high in fiber and healthy foods. You do that on a regular basis, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. Someday I'm going to do a talk on poop, because it's so necessary to understand how that could and should work. But I think I'll stick with just the sex right now. But in a woman, it gets a little more complicated than that. I learned some things I didn't know at almost 70 years old, because back on November 18th, 2019, just weeks before my manuscript was due, I had promised it December 24th. I had my surgery on the 18th, and I had a surgery. I let me catch up. I refused opiates after that surgery because I needed to stay clear-minded, and I wrote the last 5 chapters of Aging Powerfully, meaning because this is an acronym, I wrote, where are we? I wrote fully the last 5 chapters in the 3 weeks. Actually, I didn't have 3 weeks, but it took 3 weeks to recover, and actually part of a year to recover fully. And I learned what I didn't know about women's anatomy, because I had never heard of something called pelvic organ prolapse. Didn't know about that. I didn't know about pelvic organ physical therapists, but I went in for something called a pelvic organ prolapse repair. I had done some things. It's funny, because if you've read my book, you know that my mother and I didn't have much of a relationship, and I don't remember anything that she really told me as words of wisdom to live by. But I remember her admonishing me and saying to me, don't pick that up. You're going to hurt your female organs. And I always thought that was hilarious. You know what? She was right. I was a landscape designer. Crew had left. I started moving around flagstones that were between 75 and 100 pounds, squat, pull, like a sumo wrestler. And I tore some things and messed myself up. I needed this surgery. And the part of the recovery of surgery, which sort of got everything back where it belonged, which meant that my organs were um, newly traumatized, and for a while didn't know what to do. And if you find that you might have something going on as a woman in that area that could have to do with incontinence or stress incontinence or pain or a bulging in the vaginal vault, or you wear a pessary because of that. There are books that are written about this, and there are physical therapists. In any case, after the surgery, it took me 6 months to be able to use that in the way I'm talking to you now. In other words, now we're getting really personal. And it had to be stretched back out again. Yes, that happens. So when I say to somebody, use it or lose it, I'm not being flippant, because it is absolutely true that if we don't treat our sexual organs um, like we would any muscle, meaning the more I use it, the more it's ready for it, the more it expects action, the more it knows what to do. If we don't treat it that way, and I couldn't because I had had a surgery and there was absolutely no fooling around for, I believe it was 4 months, and then it had to be, this is so personal, it had to be stretched out, which took about a month and a half. Poor Tim. And there are actually things that do that. Isn't this remarkable? But let's get away from that subject. All of this to say, it was no fun, but I learned where my body parts are. Because, I don't think I'll tell you this. Anyway, I learned where my body parts are. Um, yeah, I think I'll just leave it at that. Okay. So recently I heard a podcast, and I want to recommend it if you'd like to know more about the physiology of women and men from an RN who for, gosh, what has it been, 20, 25 years, has taught 6th, 7th, and 8th graders sex education. And the way she describes a woman's anatomy from the side is, the first thing you have is the clitoris. The second thing you have is the urethra. And she says the guys say, what is all of that stuff? And the girls will quite often say, what is that? Now, these are 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. I just had a grandson promote. It used to be called graduation, promote from the 5th grade. So he'll be one of these of that age that now will have sex education. And good, thank goodness, she was talking about, in a question and answer portion, a young man who said, how do you get I think he said balls, I don't think he said scrotum, how do you get the balls into the rubber? And she said, please don't try, because he didn't get what that thing was and how to use it. Um, anyway. Oh, another kid said, um, what are fallopian pubes? Wait, what are fallopian pubes? And she said, well, you're asking me two questions because there's something called fallopian tubes. I can tell you what those are. And then there's something called pubes, but they're not the same thing. So cute stuff. Anyway, so I was watching this podcast. Jane Esselstyn is the sister of Rip Esselstyn, who had Engine 2 a whole food plant-based revolution when he was a fireman, and his father, their father, Caldwell Esselstyn, whom I became familiar with 4 years ago when I began studying whole foods, plant-based for health, because I was looking at ways to lower my cholesterol, and I came across his book, Reversing Heart Disease. And so Rip Esselstyn was in his firehouse. He found out that one of the guys, because they were going to do a challenge to see who had the lowest cholesterol, and one of the guys had cholesterol that was 300. Anything over 200 is high. 200 is even too high. People should be well below that. And the saying is, if you're at 150 or under, you're golden. And that's why we were so thrilled that Tim was 123 and I'm like 137 or something like that. And for people our age, doctors just don't see see numbers like that often. And I keep saying it's the food. So in any case, she and so Rip Esselstyn made famous Engine 2 cookbooks, because what happened is when they saw his numbers, they challenged the entire firehouse to go plant-based to support him, because he said, if you go plant-based, I think he gave him a month or two, I promise we can lower this. And it lowered it so dramatically that the firehouse became famous. He became so famous in 3-4 years. He, because of his books and his deal with Whole Foods Market and his fire engine, or the Engine 2 foods that they started offering from his recipes, he ended up stopping his fireman job and went into trying to help people with food on a regular basis. Well, he interviewed, but now he's at something called Plant Strong. When Whole Food was purchased by Amazon and things changed, he separated from them. Plant Strong is another way if you want to know about going whole food plant-based. He has Plant Strong plans that can help you go whole food plant-based. He has menus, he has foods. He's a world record holding swimmer, and he gained that highest record only, I think he's 57, only a few years ago. So he's an example of what whole foods that are plant-based can do for a body. Well, Jane Esselstyn, his sister, and his mother, Ann Esselstyn, the entire family are involved in teaching people how to go plant-based, and showing at Ann Esselstyn's age, 87, at Caldwell Esselstyn, the father, the patriarch, the physician, at 89, and they are in running down the block and cycling for hundreds of miles kind of shape. That's what plants can do for you. So this podcast called The Birds and the Bees, the Twigs and the Berries. It's funny because I looked at comments from that podcast, and somebody said, I thought I was going to be looking at insects and gardening. Anyway, the podcast is fun, funny, and informative. And I'm going to include, when you get this on YouTube, and if I can manage to get it on Facebook, I'll put a link to that conversation they had. It's really quite good, and you'll hear some of what I am saying, which I very much got from her. Anyway, so from the side view, again, the clitoris, the urethra, which is where we urinate, the vagina, and then the anus. And she called it kuva. And she made the students memorize kuva so they'll understand female anatomy. And she said, I used to write it on the board really hard on the whiteboard so that when you erased it, it was still there, to kind of haunt them into learning this. I loved it. Okay, let's talk about the clitoris. It has 8,000 nerve endings, which is the same as the penis. It was when an infant was in utero And before the cells divide, and that's about in that first 3 months of life, mainly in the third month of life, the penis is there, and if it that baby is a male, it grows outwardly. If it's a female, it shrinks down, but still part of it is on either side of the wall of the vagina where it would have been on the outside of the penis. And that's where women can get pleasure from sex, but especially with the clitoris, which then is very small. And so we really have the same, even though it's psychologically different for women. And it's not a physiological imperative. I was going to say we have the same urges because we have the same sensitivity, but men have that physiological difference, which is that they're creating sperm that they want to get rid of on a regular basis because it causes pressure, and we don't have that. But we still have the ability to have pleasure from that, and the clitoris is the center of all of that. So when somebody says, hey, let's fool around, in a way, especially if done slowly and with some intimacy rather than just slam bam, it gives a woman a chance for all of that, for the man to have blood flow because that's necessary for the penis, but quite frankly, as we've all seen, that can be boing. But for the woman, it takes a little longer. It's a little more complicated, and so it takes a while for the blood flow to engorge things and to cause lubrication and all, and for things to go as well as they would ultimately. And fooling around, taking time, can make a difference there. So again, I know I'm getting personal and specific, but these are things we need to talk about. For women and lubrication, because when after menopause, when things change and there isn't the estrogen being produced by our body, things can change in terms of lubrication, and it does get a little bit more complicated because of pregnancies. Repeated pregnancies can cause changes in the tissues, and they're not as pliable and they're not as responsive. But again, we have pelvic floor physical therapists that can help with all of that. And then there are some really good lubricants out there. And although I don't recommend ever using coconut oil to eat, it's highly saturated, and never palm oil, besides what it's doing to our the land those palm trees are grown in, and the rainforests. It is highly saturated. It's the worst that you can have of the plant oils, and coconut oil comes in second. However, it makes a really nice lubricant. Um, okay, so how do we keep the fires going in a relationship? How do we create that desire on a regular basis? For one thing, communication is essential. All forms of communication. You're in a relationship, and if there's not a relationship happening here now, there may be in the future. I didn't think I wanted one until I knew I did. We absolutely never know, and there's no oldest age. People get together in their 70s. I did in my 60s, the late 60s actually. I met Tim actually at what, 61, something like that. Um, and in the 70s, and in the 80s, and in the 90s, and it's not too late to enjoy the physical contact of another person. As a matter of fact, it can make life softer, sweeter, um, and and calmer. Um, okay, so communication in all forms, and in the bedroom, what we know, what we don't know, what we like and what we don't like, what we need and what we don't need. Um, it's helpful to be able to have that communication. And again, I'll say that all forms of communication is important, just to let somebody know that we care about them, to take the time to sit and have a meal and ask them about their day. Tim comes home every day for lunch because we are whole food plant based and not quite SOS free, salt, oil, sugar free. But I don't add oil to food. We use very little salt. I don't use any processed sugar. And for reasons that if you hear my videos, you'll understand it. It all has to do with health and it's all researched. I know some people, I won't use a name, who says, oh, you could just drink olive oil, it'd be the best thing that you can do. That is so false, but we won't get into that. If you want a healthy cardiovascular system, um, have fats, but have them in whole foods, tahini, nuts, um, uh, avocado, but not in refined oils that have been beaten to death to get the oil out of them, or first press olive oil. You still don't need that much fat in your diet to be healthy, and it certainly helps to keep your weight down when you're not dealing with hundreds and hundreds of calories that are invisible and, quite frankly, usually tasteless, meaning you can't tell the difference. I cook without oil, and you would not know the difference in my food, and it's absolutely delicious. Even the salad dressings. I'm off track. Let me get back on. All right. So Tim comes home for lunch because of that. We'll eat maybe at Chipotle where we get beans, and I just get beans, sofritas, and then just all the plant stuff. I don't even get the rice. They put oil in the rice. So he comes home because there aren't a lot of places we want to eat out. And every day for lunch, we sit in the backyard, in the shade, in the far yard. We are in a beautifully flowered garden. I happened to design it. I did that for decades, landscape designer. And or we're in the sunnier part of the yard and colder weather, and we eat our lunch outside, but we spend an hour just talking. I want to hear about his day. He asks me about mine. That's how you can keep a closeness in a relationship. No, your husband doesn't, or friend, or mate, or partner. Um, that's not a prerequisite, but the point is we need to take enough interest in who they are to have a closeness that then translates into other kinds of activities. It does make a difference. So communication, specific when it comes to sex, general when it comes to the relationship, really makes a difference. And I talk about things like that in Aging Powerfully, under Powerfully, the acronym. Also is regular touch. Sometimes, and again, being married 40 years before, now it's 10 years this time, I can tell you that there are times you kind of don't want to touch, you kind of don't want to talk, you kind of don't want to look at each other. You're really ticked off about something. I'll tell you one thing that our play day does. We both know that if we push a fight, if we're both being ornery, but we're both alpha, we're both really strong-willed, if we push a fight too far and we mess up our play day, in other words, it doesn't happen because we're both being too ornery, that would be almost like a red line that would be hard to cross back over again, meaning that that would be, it would be an unnecessary hard stop. And so somehow, it doesn't matter when we get mad at each other about what we get mad at, somehow things are always better by Sunday so that we do our Sunday play day. So let me tell you, that is a valuable way of looking at the value of not just communication and not just touch, but also just, I'll say, sexual practice. Um, I was I was in a podcast, or watching a podcast, watching an interview, watching a conversation yesterday with a friend that I've had. Actually, one of the people in on the call this was a Zoom call, a workshop type of a thing. And she was the mentor I mentioned in my book, who basically turned my life around, and her daughters. And her oldest daughter had some terrible losses. the death of a son, the death of two husbands, and they were talking about grieving, and I listened and listened and listened, and at one point I said, you know what, we were talking about relationships and guilt after the death of a person, and I said, you know, the one thing, not the one of the things I still feel guilty about, and I wish I could say to him, I'm sorry. Actually, sometimes I do. I'm sorry to my late husband, Bob, to whom I was married from. I met him at 18, married him at 19. He died when I was just about 60, and he was 62, 63. I'm sorry that I hadn't, that we didn't have more sex. I'm sorry that I wasn't more, that I just didn't do what I'm doing now, that I didn't make a point of it. We had a good relationship in that way, but I can see the difference, and I'm sorry. I was very busy building a business and building a career, and so was he, and we could let time go by, and that's a shame. Now I know that you have to work at it. And by work at it, it's not like, oh my God, the drudgery. Even though Sylvia, the woman who I admires, mother, this European, I think she was Hungarian. No, she was, it's not Hungarian. What is, oh, Sylvia, what is, oh man, oh man, oh man. Anyway, it's one of the Baltic states. Oh, anyway, her mother used to say to her, when it comes to your husband and when it comes to sex, even if you have to think beige, beige, I'll paint the ceiling beige. She said, you do it. Now that's really old world, and some of you are stomping and saying, oh, hell no. But you know what? I wish that I had done that more often, because I think sex is more of an imperative to a man than a woman. And if I could have brought that much more joy to that man's life, I never knew I was going to lose him so soon. Uh, it would have been easy enough. Anyway, so I'll leave that alone. It's important then to have regular touch. You walk by them, you brush shoulders, a kiss in the morning, kiss in the evening. You hear don't go to bed mad. I'd love to say I never did, but sometimes I do, and I'll not storm around, but anyway, do yourself a favor. In regular, everyday communication, make it clear that you two, if there is a partnership happening here, of any gender, of any sex, doesn't matter, that there's an understanding that there's a bond, and bonds happen through touch. Jane Esselstyn was talking about the different kinds of touch there is, and she used a term that I just loved. And she used the word puppy pile type touch. Well, she grew up with three brothers. Rip Esselstyn was one of them. A sister, three brothers. And she said they were always all over each other and wrestling and, you know, rolling all over the place, puppy pile. And she says, my dog does that, comes and sits on my lap and basically drips down, and that's puppy pile. We can do that in a way with friends when we're hugging and glad to see you. It's actually a little different than puppy pile, but still very physical. In other words, the touch is something we do that feels as natural and as appropriate as a puppy pile. Another kind of a touch is a massage. That kind of, you know, Rip made a point to say that Jane will massage her husband's feet sometimes when they're watching TV. I guess he's seen that at family gatherings, and that's a very sweet thing. That massage kind of calming, soothing. I love having my back scratched, and when Tim does that, I just melt. Things like that we can do. Just rubbing the back of their hair, the nape of their neck, just to make a statement non-verbally that you matter and that I like the physical closeness with you. That makes quite a statement. And then, of course, there's the sexual touch, and that is the come hither, that is the actual, during the actual act of sex, that is the precursor to sex, um, and that's different as well. And you combine all of that in a relationship, and you have a partnership that is more spontaneous, more enjoyable, more relatable, closer, and I'll use the word warmer because of those bonds, those physical bonds that are made. Um, I learned about the value of a plant based diet from Caldwell Esselstyn. And now, and yet he wrote his book back in the 90s on reversing heart disease and proved that it could be done on a plant-based diet. But people are coming out of the woodwork now, younger people and their physicians in their 40s and early 50s. Christy Funk, oncologist, breast surgeon of the stars, doctors Dean and Aisha Sherzai, two neurologists married out of Loma Linda University that have a Alzheimer's study and prevention lab there. Dr. Will Bolshewitz in his 40s, a gastroenterologist. All of these people with the same story. I became a doctor to make a difference. I was either really sick or I saw patients not getting well, and I did research, and it became very clear to me I can make people well when they change their diet, and I can help them get stronger because of the value of plants in their diet. And so I will say that to you as it relates to sex. I'll take it back to what I had said. How do you hold on to your mate? You make sure that they're eating well, that what they're eating has lots of nitric oxide, where you get nitric oxide from greens, from leafy greens, polyphenols from vegetables, or phytonutrients, phytochemicals. Again, the healthiest foods on the planet without the the what word am I trying to find? Without the effects of inflammation that we get from non-plant foods. Most plant foods simply feed the microbiome, make us stronger, and give us the nutrients that we need. So how do you hold on to your man? Men identify by their erections. No, don't hold on to the erection. I'm sorry. Reach over and Nan, stop. You hold on to your mate, and that mate could be a male or a female, um, by keeping them healthy, by keeping them wholesome, by keeping them fit emotionally, physically, and sexually, so that they still see their value in that way. Um, Sexual behavior is a habit. In my life, it's become something that happens spontaneously, but we have a date for it. We have a date for it that's kind of etched in stone, and we don't plan anything else unless we change the date and make it on another date. And even that doesn't happen very often because we like our Sundays and how we live that Sundays or that Sunday. It's unspoken, and yet it is expected. We are sexual beings. It's hardwired into us. It is a physiological imperative as it relates to ancestral evolution. And life is so much richer when we have that as part of our life. I intend, knock on wood, Tim and I intend, if we are fortunate, God willing, to go into our 80s and 90s and beyond, and we'll do it, hopefully, with this remaining a big part of our life. So let me ask you, when is your play day? When do you take care of yourself? in that way? When do you take care of yourself and your partner in that way? Do you prioritize it the way you prioritize the other important things in your life? If not, consider what I said earlier. One of my primary regrets, looking back at a 40-year marriage, is that I hadn't done that more often. Anyway, that's all I have to say. I hope that you got something from this. I hope it was worth your while. Um, and thank you for joining me. Remember to subscribe. Remember to thumbs up. Remember to write me and ask questions if you have them. Consider getting Aging Powerfully. It's part memoir, pretty interesting story, and a lot of good sense. And I'll leave it with have a great day because I know I'm going to. Bye bye. Oh, and again, I'll post the link to uh, Rip and Jane Esselson's conversation, and I thank them for that. I got a lot of good information from them. Bye bye.